famous Section 1325.
1325.
Yeah. The numbers that nobody heard of before, but now everybody's talking about.
Yeah, that's a debate tactic.
Do you want to talk about the debate tactic?
Go for it.
There's a great way to come off looking like a policy wonk, and then the way you do it is you grab one or two bills, right, and you learn the number of those, right, and you specifically cite those numbers, so that way people at home listening will go, okay, he's citing a detail of this I don't know.
Now
you can.
His stuff.
He does know his stuff, yes.
Yeah.
He knows the number. Now Julian Castro could have very easily just gone, let's talk about decriminalization, and everybody would have gone, oh, okay, I know what that is.
Yeah.
But he leads off with Section 1325, and then everybody has to go, all right, well now I need Julian Castro to tell me what Section 1325 is, and he's educating me.
Yeah.
Which makes him come off as an authority, and it's a great tactic. I love it. The minute he did it, I knew that's how you establish.
Yeah.
You introduce something that you then have to explain to your audience, and suddenly you become an authority. So Section 1325, we're talking about decriminalization.
Decriminalization of what? Can you go into that?
Decriminalization of entering the country without documentation. It's the difference between a civil offense and a criminal offense, right? And that's a very basic idea. So let's talk about hurting people, right? Like there's, the sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt me, okay? And I guess that's probably the easiest way to break down what a civil offense is versus a criminal offense, right? So words, you can hurt somebody with words, right? And there is law, regarding that. Slander, libel, these things are illegal acts if you hurt somebody with them. But you can't go to jail for libel, right? You can go to court and you might have to pay fines or penalties for that. But hurting people via words is a civil offense. Now, if you punch somebody in the face,
That's a criminal offense.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right?
You will most likely go to jail for that.
Exactly. So what we're talking about is how we codify what being in the United States without documentation is. Now, 1325 is a section that was enacted about 90 years ago, and it was pushed through by someone who was actually a segregationist white supremacist.
Yeah.
Right.
And it requires documentation in order to come into the country.
Yes. What Julian Castro did was bring up Section 1325, and what he called Beto out on was that Beto had not advocated for decriminalizing border crossing, right?
Yeah. Undocumented.
Undocumented. And Beto's response was...
I think it was essentially that, he wants to make sure that we do have a quote-unquote secure border, and people who are attempting to cross for drug trafficking and human trafficking will get punished for that. But then Julian brought up the point that there are specific sections that deal with each of those crimes.
And this is where I break with Beto on this. So I deal with business logic, right? I have to write, I don't know if you're familiar with what a case statement is, but it's a waterfall in which you assign, you assign values to things, right? Where you go, if this condition exists, then we call it this. If this condition exists, then we call it that. If anything else, then we call it something else, right? And law is kind of like that. So the idea that you have to have just crossing being a criminal offense to capture these other two things is wrong.
Yeah.
Because what you would essentially do is go, oh, is this human trafficking? We will prosecute that, right? It's a criminal offense. Is this drug trafficking? We will prosecute that as a criminal offense. You don't need to say they simply crossed and that is a criminal offense. Because we've done that, we can now get to this other thing.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I feel like making it a civil offense as opposed to a criminal offense is that you actually free up resources, and that's the thing that people don't think about. If you are not having to capture anybody who simply comes over, process them, detain them, pay for their detention, actually put people on the ground to make sure that they're monitored, fed, and cared for while detained simply for crossing. Well, now you have more money to prosecute people who are trafficking, humans or drugs, right? You have more people on the ground to look for those offenses. You have more money to dedicate to those things, and I think that's why, if we ignore. And it's hard to do that, but if we were to ignore simply the humanitarian reason to decriminalize, these other reasons make it glaringly obvious that we are wasting our resource by pursuing what is essentially a petty crime.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's my opinion on Section 1325 and why I would support decriminalizing border crossings. Undocumented border crossings. There you go.
So another thing, so when we went and saw Julian speak in Frisco on Monday, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that he brought up in his Q&A was that he wants to, if he becomes president, put forth what he calls like the Latin American version of the Marshall Plan.
The new Marshall Plan.
The new Marshall Plan.
Yeah.
And I was wondering what you thought about that.
You actually asked me about that.
Yeah, I did ask you about that.
The second it came out of his mouth, and my response was, it makes me nervous.
So the Marshall Plan is an economic stimulus plan that the United States put into place to help Europe get back on its feet after World War II, after the mass devastation. But of course there are reservations with that because of our history in Latin America.
If we're discussing a Marshall Plan where we are infusing capital, I don't want to say capital, that's the wrong word, where we're infusing aid and stimulus in a way that would be a no strings attached version of aid that would help these people build their economies and actually become in some ways autonomous in a way that they haven't been before, I support that. One of the things that I have a big problem with, though, is traditionally we haven't done that. Normally when we spend money in those areas, there is a particular reason that we spend that money. Strings are attached, and in effect what we wind up doing is subverting the will of people to be independent in their own country. But that's a larger conversation that we need to have because, we sometimes have the conversations on how did we get here, and if we look back on our history in Central America, this little strip between the two continents that somehow gets screwed over by the entire world. We need to look at the history of how we got there to kind of understand the crisis that we have at the border.
Yeah.
And that'll probably be the next section that we do.